Good. All right. So I'm here today to talk about Appium and the process of creating an open source project and watching it become quite popular. My name is Dan Cuellar. I've created Appium, which I'll tell you what it is if you don't know what it is later. I currently manage the software testing at a startup in London called FOODit. I also manage the front-end JavaScript developers. Previously, I've managed the QA at Shazam, and I've managed QA and developers at a dating site in the US called Zeus.com. And way back, a long time ago, I worked at a company you may have heard of called Microsoft on some products like Excel and Outlook that you know and love. And then really, really long time ago, I went to school and got a computer science degree. But that was a long time ago. So I'm here today to tell the story of Appium. So raise your hand if you know what Appium is. Well, about half of you, okay. I was expecting better than that, but I won't be too set back by that. So anyways, I guess to tell the story, I need to sort of tell you how it comes about. So let's talk about where Appium comes from. And I think it's the classic necessity is the mother of invention story. So it all starts when I take a new job at a dating site in the US called Zeus.com. And it starts with the most terrifying 5 words in testing, as I call it. Does anyone here know what those words are? Would anyone like to suggest 5 words? No, well, all right. Those are the words. So why might these words be terrifying? These words are terrifying because it's kind of like a time warp. Way back in the day, I don't know, most of you look too young for this, but I'm sort of too young for it too. But software used to ship on physical media for the longest time, be it tapes or floppy disks or hard, I guess, non-floppy disks, what we call 3.5 inch, 3 1/4, I forget how big those things were. You know, CD-ROMs, DVD-ROMs, whatever it may be. Software shipped on physical media, and I've kind of found my experience with the App Store to be a bit like this. And so I've worked on a few products that shipped on physical media in my day. When I worked at Microsoft, I worked on Office 2007, which shipped on CDs, and Office 2010, which shipped on DVDs. And it's a bit different than what I guess most people deal with at the time. You know, around the turn of the millennium, 2000, websites are very popular. Everyone had a website. And the great thing about websites is that the code exists in one place at a time, so it's quite easy to change it because it's in the data center. And with physical media, the code exists in many places, in many states, at many times. To get a user to change the code, you can't just change it on your web server. You have to send them a CD-ROM or Windows update them or do something. Usually they have to explicitly want this updated code. And the testing paradigms for these two kinds of things are quite different. And so are the development paradigms. So if you've ever worked on a website, you hear lots of things like Agile and Scrum, move fast, break shit, all that stuff. No one ever said that about a CD product, I guarantee you, because it's quite expensive to print all the CDs over again because you made a mistake. And not only that, but getting your customer's postal address to mail them the CDs is quite tricky. And then the postage isn't cheap either. Nonetheless, no one ever said that about Microsoft Office. Let's move fast and break shit. No one, those words were never uttered in Redmond, I guarantee you. So the processes are a bit different. So when you work on a website, it's very iterative, very agile. So frequently you'll have an idea, you'll throw out an experiment, you'll look at the data in real time because you have the web server, you can see how the users behave and respond to your product. You make tweaks. You don't tend to plan more than a few weeks in advance, something like that. Whereas on a product like Windows or Office or whatever, you were planning months in advance, if not years in advance. And at the end of the release cycle, you have all these code freezes and lockdowns and test cycles and all that sort of stuff. And so when I took the job as the test manager, I was confronted with my first mobile app. I'd never worked on a mobile application for iOS. And I'm calling out iOS specifically here for a reason. So the reason being that the App Store itself is an interesting wrinkle in the whole test process. So I'm sure you're very familiar with how long it takes Apple to decide that your code is worthy of being in its App Store. If they like you, it could be a few days, but typically it's more like 5 to 10 days. So if you make a mistake in the App Store, you're going to pay for it for days, if not weeks. So if you, I don't know, broke chat on the dating site, there could be several weeks where no one could chat on the mobile app, and that might be quite bad for business. Not that that ever happened. It kind of did. And so because of that, my boss gave me the challenge of, we can't ever have this happen again. What do we do? So I thought back to my days working on these sorts of things, and there were these processes in place, but this is a startup. We don't know if we're going to be around in 6 months. So we really can't have a 2-month code freeze. It's just not feasible, right? The techniques that worked on this just aren't feasible. So I came up with the idea like, well, what's one thing we could carry forward? Well, on Office we had lots and lots of testing and automation. And so I took a look around at the scene at the time, and hopefully no one here wrote any of these tools because they all suck. But everything was horrible. You have, on the left, you have Instruments JavaScript, or UI Automation JavaScript, which is the library Apple provides to automate apps. This was released, I believe, with iOS 4 or Xcode 4 or something, one of those. It had been around a couple of years at the point. It tended to be the most popular one for iOS, and it's flawed just from design. So if you're not familiar with it, you have to write your tests in JavaScript, which makes absolutely no sense because you have to write your apps in Objective-C. So if you have good Objective-C developers, all those skills go to waste when they want to write a test because they probably don't know JavaScript as well. And likely no one is doing a whole lot of automation in JavaScript at the time. Anyway, it also runs inside the profiler, so that tool you use to find out, what function call is taking the most time, or how much memory you're using, or that kind of thing, that's where they decide to put the automation. Didn't make any sense. So anyways, the other big downfall was you could only run static JavaScript files, so no real-time interaction. You spit in a JavaScript file, you get this XML output. It's kind of not all that dynamic and useful. Another tool is Appium, which is just a bit too flaky and low level, and then I won't even dignify PhoneMonkey with describing what it is. If you want to know, look it up. So what is Appium, and what makes it different? So I thought to myself, well, I worked on the Office web apps, so when you go to Excel and open a spreadsheet on Office 365, that was a product I worked on when I was there. And we use Selenium to automate that. And Selenium is a quite popular tool, quite common. It's the standard for automating web applications. It has a protocol which is still pending. I've been saying this for 4 years, W3C standard. Someday maybe the W3C will approve this standard, but hey, there's a draft on their desk, and it's been there for a while. And Appium takes that protocol, which we all already know and love, and just repurposes it for mobile devices. If you think about it, you can draw some pretty clear analogies between the two, mobile and web automation. You have DOM, you have elements, you click them, you tap them, that sort of thing. It's 90% the same from a paradigm perspective. And so that was the idea. I was like, well, why don't we just do something like Selenium? So this is sort of the philosophy that was in my head at the time, and has later been made beautiful and codified by smart people. So it was a little messier when it was in my head. But I wanted to use things that were standardized and sanctioned. I didn't want to be, injecting code into Apple or having you modify your application or anything like that. And I wanted to be able to write in the language we wrote all our other tests in, which in our case was C#. So we had an automation team, they wrote tests in C#, they don't know JavaScript. Wouldn't it be great if we could reuse all those tests in C# on the mobile app? And if you think about it, on a dating site, if you write your tests at the right level of abstraction, it all makes sense whether you're on a website or on a phone. Log in with a user that hasn't paid their bill, go to their bill page, it says they owe money. Log in with a user that pays for a subscription and try and send a message user that also pays for a subscription. All these scenarios are platform agnostic, right? So wouldn't it be great if all we had to do was rewrite the page objects and we had all our tests on mobile? That would be wonderful. And I wanted something that was sort of just free and open source. I didn't have to pay for anything, I guess was the other thing I was thinking. So I wrote a tool in cooperation with our iOS team lead at the time that took the UI automation JavaScript library Appium provided and hijacked it, or bootstrapped, depending on how inflammatory I want to be, to run a server that took commands in real time. So the way it was initially implemented, and I'm disclosing this to you just out of shame, is that we wrote a while true loop in JavaScript that sat there and scanned a folder for sequentially ordered text files. So 1.txt, 2.txt, 3.txt. So it would sit there, and Apple has sandboxed their automation framework such that you can't access the outside world, but they gave you one hole. And the hole was this method called perform host task argument with timeout, or something like that. And what it basically meant was that you could execute shell commands from the test. So if you needed to, curl something or whatever you might want to do, you could do it. So we sit there and we run cat looking for 1.txt in a while true loop. Eventually, the client will deposit this text file there, and it will have a raw UI automation JavaScript command. So we take the output of the cat of that file, which is just the contents of the file, and we run eval on it. Eval is a JavaScript method which just executes code from a string. So now we've taken this code that we've injected from text file and we've executed it. Then we take the output and we write a sequentially ordered response file. And on the client side, we're watching for that. And then the loop repeats itself over and over again. So I think the initial implementation involved 3 shell commands, cat, Python, to write the file. And I don't remember what the third one is, but if I went to the code base, I could find it. It now is not a dirty hack anymore, but this was the proof of concept, right? So now we've taken this UI automation JavaScript framework, which is sandboxed, and we've set it free. We can feed it JavaScript commands in real time, and we can probe the app, and we can play around, and we can mess around with it now in real time. So we wrote an implementation of the Selenium C# bindings that, instead of talking over HTTP to a Selenium server, would write text files to a folder. And I showed that to some people at some point. Nowadays, the server actually opens a socket and listens and takes WebDriver compliant commands, converts them to JavaScript commands, and sends them over to instruments to run. There's no text files, no Python, no shell commands. But anyways, that's the idea. And so if you look at Appium code, it's just Selenium code. There's a few extra capabilities for whatever platform. So you see here, iOS, you have to provide device name and the name of the path to the application you want to test. But that's about it. For Android, you just need a package and an activity on top of that. It looks the same as Selenium code. It's all done with the DOM, so driver find element, you can do by class name, XPath, accessibility ID, whatever you want. Actions are pretty much the same as they are in Selenium. I really always feel pointless giving a code demo with Appium because it's just Selenium code. So learn Selenium, you've learned Appium at the same time. And I'll go into that later. So anyways, I've come up with this thing at work. We start to use it. And now we've taken our automated tests that we have for the website. We've implemented some page objects for the mobile site, which find elements using mobile-specific techniques. And we have taken our tests, and now they're running on iOS as well as on the website. So we have repurposed. We're now using Selenium for everything, which is great. We didn't have to rewrite all our tests. It wasn't a huge effort. Some of them didn't work. We just turned them off because they don't make sense, like they're not implemented on iOS. But in general, most of the tests work, and we have tests on all the platform. So I applied to talk at this conference before I wrote this tool. It was called Selenium Conference. It was in London back in 2012. And I went there to talk about something entirely different. Not Appium, or I guess what was called Appium now at the time. So I go to the conference and I do my talk, and as part of my talk I show off that we're running tests on iOS as well. And it was just kind of, the talk was more about writing the abstracted test that can run on any platform was what my talk was about. And so to demo that I showed, look, this is a web test, this is an iOS test. Same code, test both products, because we wrote it at the right way of abstraction. And so everyone saw that and was like, wait a second, you're controlling an iOS device with Selenium. How does that work? I've never seen that before. So they encouraged me to sign up for a lightning talk. And a lightning talk, I don't think they have them at this conference, but basically anyone who goes to the conference writes the name on a whiteboard. They get 5 minutes in front of the whole conference and they can say whatever they want to, provided they're not selling anything, I think was the one restriction. So obviously I had nothing to sell. So I went in, I showed them my dirty hacks, my text files, my Python and cat commands running inside UI automation. The crowd cheers and everyone loves it. And I'm thinking, oh wow, this is going to really take off. Well, it really didn't. I got an email from a guy in Florida who wanted to pay me some money for it. Not a lot of money. Not enough to cover my flight to London, I don't think. So nothing worthwhile. And literally nothing happened. And so I sat around for a few months. We kept using it in the office. We loved it. You know, figured, oh well, I must have read the crowd wrong. And then I get a phone call from the CTO of Sauce Labs, and he says to me, oh, I remember your demo at Selenium conference 4 months ago. Could you show me how that works? Like, can we meet? And so I meet him in a bar in San Francisco, and I show him the code, and he's like, oh, this is perfect. This is just what we need. And so he goes off with the code. I don't know what happens. No one tells me anything ever. That's the whole point of this project. No one ever talks. No one tells me anything. But I get an invite to a conference in San Francisco a few months later from Sauce Labs to go show off the thing I've done at this conference called the Mobile Test Summit. And the Mobile Test Summit was a conference where all the people working on tools at the time, you know, Calabash, Sakuli, Frank, Kif, all the popular frameworks, Robotium, all the people who did that were at this conference showing off their tool. And the idea was, let's get everyone involved in writing mobile automation in the same room, and let's come up with the best idea of how to do it. And so we all get in the room, and I give my demo, and I sit down, and you know, it goes about as well as anyone else's demo goes. It works, I guess. And then at the end of the conference, the guys from Sauce Labs go up, and they didn't tell me they were going to do this. And they have been working on Appium it's still not called Appium at this point, I don't believe. But they've been working on my code base for a month, and they've put it in the cloud, and they're offering their customers a beta of running Dan's automation framework in the cloud with the Selenium client. So it's completely crazy. And then I guess at that point, they've created a GitHub repo and not told me about it, and it's called Appium. I was sort of involved in that, but it wasn't my name. And then it just starts to take off. So it's kind of a crazy story. From there, you know, you get one contributor, then you get 5 contributors, and now if you look at Appium, we have over 3,000 stars. We're one of the 200 most forked projects on GitHub. We have hundreds of thousands of people that use us. Our V1, which is 2 years old at this point, was downloaded by almost 200,000 people, which is pretty crazy. And so it sort of gets there over time. And so what this talk is about is sort of all the dumb things I did along the way that almost prevented all this from happening. And the goal is that all of you can learn from these mistakes I've made and not repeat them. And that by the end of it, you will know how to effectively contribute to an open source project, consume an open source project, or possibly even create an open source project. So the first step of an open source project is just getting the word out. So I went to a conference, I talked about it. That's sort of the minimum almost that you can do. There's a lot more that we did with Appium that led to its growth. For the first year of the project, we had a forum on GitHub, Google forum. I feel what this call is dead now. Google's killed the product and we've changed forums. But there was a forum somewhere on Google. And people would ask questions. And we would answer every single one of them. I would get into the office every morning at 7 a.m. and probably for 45 minutes, I would go through every question. And if I knew the answer, I would answer it. And if I didn't know the answer, I would give them a suggestion or more information or ask them questions. And then we go from there. And then Jonathan from Sauce Labs would do the same thing. Same thing with Stack Overflow, etc. And so for the first year, it was really important because there's no documentation. You're not Googleable if your project's a month old. People can't just say, how do I do this in Appium? You're not going to find the answer. Nowadays, we don't even need documentation. You can just Google everything, which is kind of nice. But in your first year, it's not that way. And the biggest barrier to people adopting your product is just understanding how to use it. There's no one they can ask for help. There's not a million blog posts. There's no professional company that can come in and train them on this. So it's all on you to get them to understand how your product works. Fortunately, we're bootstrapped on top of Selenium, which is a product a lot of people already understand. So the barrier to learning for Appium is quite small compared to other products. If you look at something like Calabash or Frank, you're required to add an SDK to your app. You're required to learn their API, which is in one specific programming language. It wasn't like that with Appium. You just wrote Selenium tests, and there's a couple little peculiarities you had to add into it. Jonathan, myself, and a few other people would literally go anywhere that would have us. So I'm in Siberia today, which I never thought my entire life I would be in Siberia. No offense, this is quite far from where I'm from. I think we're 11 time zones from home at this point. That's only because we've jumped an hour ahead. So normally this is the total opposite side of the world for me. But I can recall taking a 13-and-a-half-hour flight to Australia, and then like 15 people showing up to my talk. So I literally was in an airplane for more hours than people I spoke to. But I guess just an aside, funny part of that story, my boss didn't understand that my flight back was at 5 o'clock on Wednesday, or it was on Tuesday. I think I literally flew there on Friday. You land on Sunday. I talked on Monday, and I flew back Tuesday. So a very quick trip to Australia. And it's a 5 o'clock flight on Tuesday, and I've already worked remotely on Tuesday. And I land in San Francisco, and it's 8 a.m. the same day because of the stupid dateline. My boss makes me come into work, and I'm like, I've already worked Tuesday. It was Tuesday at 5 o'clock when I got on that plane. But try explaining that to someone. They don't understand. So I actually ended up I ended up working an extra day that week. So anyways, we went to some places. This is actually quite nice. This is a big conference. This is kind of nice. They're not all like this. Sometimes you're in a terrible hotel room where you're afraid you're going to get shot at the middle of the night. Sometimes they don't get you a cab at the airport. Sometimes you have to take the bus. Anyways, I won't go into it. But nonetheless, we went a lot of places. Anywhere that would accept us, we would go. Another thing I felt was important about getting the word out is we had a clear mission and philosophy. That slide I showed earlier has been there from day one. I didn't make it. I'll credit Jason Huggins with it, who's the CTO of Sauce Labs. No one really knows who wrote it. I think it's generally based on some ideas he had. I also met with several companies that were interested, and then the people at Sauce Labs, the social media people there, went crazy with Twitter and a few other things, which is quite useful. So something I wanted to share, learning, working on open source project is, the bigger it gets, the more out of control it gets, which sounds bad, but it really isn't. It's like a movement, right? Like someone does something and then everyone the movement gets a life of its own, right? So it's quite different than like a normal product. Like if you work at a company and you do something successful, you tend to stay in charge of it. And if it gets bigger, you get more people under you and that kind of thing. It's not like that with open source. It's like Frankenstein. At one point it breaks out of the chair and terrorizes the city. And that's sort of what Appium did for the first 2 years. It terrorized the city and we had no control over it. So like for example, one day a website just showed up. Another, like, I didn't make it. I didn't ask anyone to make it. Someone's like, I'm a web developer. I like Appium. Let's build a website. They bought the domain name. They, donated to the project, whatever. Now Appium has a website. Neat. Android support was never intended for this product. But one day, some guy was like, oh, look, you can do the same thing with Android. Makes a pull request. Lo and behold, Appium is now an iOS and Android mobile automation framework. Never asked anyone to do it. Never thought about it. Like I said, the Android App Store problem is not there, so there wasn't as much of a need for it. But yeah, I mean, Android automation, sure, great. That, I would say Google provides a respectable tool set for automating Android, whereas Apple does not. So there wasn't really the need for it either. But anyway, one day the project decided to change the language of the project, and I was on the losing side of that vote. So imagine, one day people are like, you know what, Dan, you're going to have to start speaking Spanish now. Deal with it. We know it's your project, but hey, it's JavaScript. So I was quite upset about this, but it turned out to be one of the better decisions that was ever made, but I won't go into that now. At one point, I lost the commit bit on the project. So, moral of the story, don't make everyone an admin. And now GitHub has more precise permissions, but at the time it was either admin or nothing, pretty much. So I had to ask to be re-added to my project at one point. I still haven't found out who removed me, and I'm not happy about it, but I hope they're not on the project anymore. And then the ultimate insult, I applied to talk at a conference, and my proposal was rejected. And the reason they gave me was, we've already had so many Appium submissions, we've just selected some other ones instead of yours. And I was thinking, but I'm the guy who made the damn thing. Why am I not the one talking about it? But then someone gave me some advice. They're like, it's a good thing, Dan. Like, other people want to talk about your thing. That's good. Let them do it. It'll encourage them. You know, it's good. And so after 5 minutes of being pissed off, I was like, actually, this is pretty cool. Anyway, another sort of issue I'd like to address with it was sort of how it all got out of hand and became not scalable. So eventually, you and Jonathan will not be able to wake up every morning at 7 a.m. and read the form and answer every single question. When there's 15, 20 questions a day, it's an hour's worth of work. When there's 300 questions a day, it's a full-time job. And my boss will get quite upset if that's all I did at work all day was answer form questions about Appium. So you'll need to have a community there to chip in and do all that. And so if you've been good with answering the form questions with lots of detail, you've, in theory, built a user base that can then also contribute answers. And that's exactly what happened. Eventually, Jonathan and I weren't needed to answer the questions because other people who had heard our answers could regurgitate them, and other people were using the product, and other people had answers we didn't have, etc. At some point, you won't be able to really scrutinize every commit. So unit tests are your friend. Demand that people write good commit notes, write good release notes, add unit tests. And at one point, you won't really know what's going on anymore because there's other people merging commits, there's several admins, you know. So release notes are good, commit messages are good. That's how I tend to keep up to date with what's going on. So this is the one slide that sort of summarizes everything that I kind of learned and all the dumb stuff I did and all the stuff that's, don't laugh at me, it's not cool. Anyway, so if you want to start an open source project, rule number 1, don't use proprietary technologies. So if I want to start a business in China, I'm not going to go there and start selling them, you know, Portuguese stuff. It doesn't make any sense. So if you're going to write an open source project, use a language that's open source, like Python or JavaScript or something like that. Don't use, let's say, .NET 5 years ago. I can't say this anymore because .NET's now open source, but at the time it wasn't, and I wrote it in .NET because I like .NET, and that's what my company used. Anyways, so don't write an open source project in .NET in 2010. No one will contribute. The .NET community at the time was not an open source community. And I still wouldn't say it is, but it's going in that direction. I didn't put code on GitHub initially. Initially, I just email it to people. Like, oh, here's a zip file. Figure it out. That results in your sent mail folder getting very large and you having to delete it at points. And then the code, you know, they could just claim it's theirs, you know. Not that that ever happened, but you get the idea. If you put it on GitHub or something more standard, everyone can look at it. You can just send them a link. They can make pull requests, they can contribute. It's wonderful. If you email it to people, not so great. I thought I was being more personal. I was like, well, they're getting an email from me. It's more personal than if I just fawn them off on GitHub, but it's not. Well, it is, but not in a good way. Initially, it was like the code is the documentation. This is a QA room, I think, so we've all heard that. We don't need documentation, just read the code. Yeah, you do need documentation, because not everyone is a JavaScript developer who's going to use your product. Our product supported every language under the sun, meaning you could write tests in Ruby, you could write tests in Python. So why would I expect those people to use JavaScript code as their documentation? It was sort of silly. I used to not post my slides online. I don't know why, I was just lazy. But now I have SlideShare decks with thousands of people liking them and that sort of thing, and people have learned from them, so it's quite useful. And I would just email people when they'd ask questions. I wouldn't post it on a forum. That's not scalable because that's like one person getting one answer. Posting on a forum, it gets indexed by Google, and eventually questions start answering themselves and not being asked to do, which is wonderful. Another interesting thing that I thought was kind of counterintuitive was how you handle conflict with an open source project. So I think the most important thing we did once again was having the philosophy from the beginning. But in an open source project, unlike in the corporate world, there is no real rigid chain of command, right? At any point, someone can just commandeer the thing and fork it, right? You have several admins, they can just merge what they want. Like, I can't threaten to fire somebody, I can't, replace somebody, like, I don't have, you know what I mean? Like, you could kick someone out of the project, I guess, but, like, it's not the corporate world. So there's no control. It's kind of like a democracy, sort of, with no president or something like that. So it's actually best to have your conflict out in the open. And as someone who manages people for a living, I would never say this. Yeah, you two have a disagreement. Just go in the kitchen and shout at each other. Like, HR would kill me if I told them to do that. But on an open source project, that's precisely what you want. You want them to go on the forum and call each other nasty names and present their arguments. And at the end of the day, people will chime in and you'll sort of see where it goes. And then usually if you have reasonable people on your project, they will come up with the most awesome, correct solution after a while. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes people leave. It's only happened like once or twice early in the project. But it's not the end of the world because it's open source. They're going to go work on some other open source project that's designed to kill yours because you didn't like their idea. And it's open source, so if they come up with anything new and innovative, you can incorporate it, and likewise, if you come up with anything new and innovative, they can take it from you. So it's like if you lost an employee, but you could still see all the code they wrote after you fired them. I don't know. It's interesting. And lastly, I would say, sometimes instead of dispute, just write the patch. And then it's like, well, we could sit here and argue about this, or I kind of wrote the code. This is bad, but it works, so do as I do, don't do as I say, or I don't know, ignore that. Anyway, sometimes peace is not an option, but like I said, it's not a bad thing. People leave, competition's good. If there weren't multiple projects trying to do the same thing, you end up with people just getting lazy and not working on good stuff. So I think having several other projects other than Appium exist is quite good because they push each other forward and they each push the envelope, and then you can incorporate each other's changes. So examples of this, there's a project that solved the problem we had where it would take 2 seconds to execute a command on iOS. Their solution's open source, we can take it. And likewise, when we came up with a solution, they took it from us and they put it in theirs. And it's licensed that way, which is wonderful. So, by the numbers now, I guess this is 4 years at this point, I should update this slide. We're at around 3,500 stars and around, I think, 2,200 forks today, which is a lot. That is one of the top 200 most forked projects on GitHub. I don't know why people like forking it so much. There's an obscene number of forks for such a small number of stars. Like, we're only in the top, 10,000 starred projects, but forks were high. I think that means a lot of people just roll their own Appium, which is probably not good. It probably means we're not doing something we should be doing, but I'll take it. It's cool. Over 150 people have contributed a patch to Appium, which is enormous and cool. And there's other huge projects that can't even come close to that number. That is a really high number for patches, especially for a product that's targeted at a lot of people that don't really code, like this one. And like I said, we had almost 200,000 downloads of Appium 1.0, and we fixed 3,000 bugs. It's more like 6,000 now. It's an embarrassingly high number. I don't know how there are 6,000 bugs in the product, but nonetheless, they've been fixed. So we are responsive. So just a quick update. What's new at Appium 1.5? This is not on this print. There's nothing new in Appium 1.5. It's a total rewrite of the code base to make it more stable and testable and extensible. But I felt like I'd be cheating you guys. I put a blank slide up. So hey, we rewrote the code base. No new features though. We have a CI strategy. We have unit tests. So for those of you who use Appium, you may be familiar with the idea that you don't want to upgrade it. It's sort of like Jenkins or some other products, where you find a version that works for you, and then you stay with it. And then at some point, Apple or Android releases a new SDK, and you have to upgrade it. And then you spend a couple of days finding a bunch of bugs in Appium or rewriting your tests or that sort of thing. Well, that will no longer happen. We have a thorough suite of tests now, and so it should be quite easy to extend the product, and it has been so far. We released this about a month ago, so we've had a good month of not a lot of new issues coming in. We fixed stuff. The only real change is that we got rid of a bunch of command line switches and made them something else. And then we have like a whole charter and code of conduct and governance structure, some adult stuff. And like I said, why did we rewrite it? 3 years of patches and organic growth. Like I said, it was never designed to support Android. So the architecture from the minute was flawed. It was like a one-platform solution, and now it does Android and Firefox OS and Windows Phone and Windows 10 and all sorts of stuff. So the main point was just to address the instability complaints. The code was not modular at all. There were JavaScript callback pyramids 40 levels deep, spread across several files. It was terrible. And the whole thing was poorly tested. And it was written on archaic JavaScript standards. So, look, it's modularized. I don't expect you to be able to read that. Modularized. It's sane now. There's an old diagram, which is hilarious. It has like 5 times as many modules, I feel like, and then the arrows, yeah, they go weird places. I don't have it in here. But anyway, it's sort of more high level. There it is. So what's coming next? Windows Phone and Windows 10 will be in there soon. Maybe next week. Check. Maybe. I can't talk about that, though. I've been sworn to secrecy. We're in the process of writing new GUIs. I wrote both the GUIs, and I haven't worked on them in like 2 or 3 years. So if they suck, it's my fault. But no one pays me to work on this, and I don't have time for it. And they're open source, so other people can fix them. But anyways, there's some people working on writing a better GUI. So that will come soon. We have multiple new iOS backends, and what that means is that Apple has deprecated UI automation JavaScript. So the wonderful hack I wrote 5 years ago will be removed from the code base shortly and replaced with an implementation that uses their modern XCUI test Swift-based framework instead of the JavaScript-based one. Currently, their framework doesn't work, but we have a complete implementation. So if Apple wants to use that as a unit test for when they actually want to write their framework, that would be wonderful. But hopefully by the time they deprecate UI automation JavaScript, they actually implement XCUI test, which they haven't done. And we're working on better docs and onboarding material, and then there's the foundation thing. So I have a little bit of time for questions, if anyone has any questions about anything. And then I have like 5-10 minutes for questions, then I have a little closing thing. Yeah, 5 minutes for questions.
Ребят, давайте сейчас пару вопросов, и остальные перенесем в экспертную зону, потому что время уже очень мало. У кого вопросы?
Hello, thanks a lot. For Appium, do you have any plans to make Appium installation way easy?
There are third-party installers out there that do that, but yes, with the onboarding material, we want to make it. If you've ever installed Xamarin in Studio, you know how it'll install the Android SDK for you and the iOS SDK will do all that for you? That's the idea. I imagine that should come. I don't know who's working on it or anything, but that's high on the list for sure.
Okay.
Еще вопросы?
Hi Dan, thank you for this topic. I have a quite short question. When you've been creating Appium, what was the main goal of this project?
To write automated tests for the dating site so that my boss stopped yelling at me.
You've been solving some kind of the project problem or some kind of testing global goal or?
Yeah, it was to get regular automated testing on the iOS app so that we could make changes and we could give the developers immediate feedback on the quality of those changes. Because human beings aren't designed to sit at a mobile phone and test it all day. So you can't run all your test cases manually unless you hire a bunch of testers. Like, if you've ever used an iPhone for 10 hours in a day, you're going to hurt yourself. Like, it's a tiny screen and it's just not meant to be that way. So people slow down. It's not like a computer, which is you're designed to sit at all day.
Oh yeah. Usually when you're testing the mobile apps, you're tormenting yourself on a small size of the phone.
Yeah,
so it is painful.
You can't run a 5-day test pass on an iPhone. Your QA team will kill you. And then you find one major bug and you get to start all over again. You know? So, anyway.
Thanks.
Последний вопрос. Hi, I'm Nick, and I'm a test engineer. Well, you said that the documentation is very important for the development of an open source product, but it's a thing that not all developers like to make. So, do you require them to document the features that they make, or do you have some devoted members of the community who contribute to documentation at most?
The second one. Yeah, developers will never do it. No, it's just never going to happen. And they don't write great documentation, you know, myself included. But yes, the idea will be that we will find some people who write documentation for a living and we will, you know, incorporate them.
Are those people, well, technical writers by profession, or is it usually
It hasn't been done yet, but ideally, yeah, someone who wrote technical documentation in the past.
Thank you.
Ага, спасибо. Мы сейчас в экспертную зону пройдем, там можно будет
I think there was one back there. Let's let him. Oh, okay. Okay, so I have 5 minutes? Okay. Wait, we got 5 more minutes. So, yeah. What?
You have to go to another place where you can,
Oh, I can't finish my presentation?
you need to prepare the next.
Oh. I had an inspirational ending for you guys. Oh,
How long?
I can do it in 2 minutes.
Okay, let's
All right. So, I was going to show you a video of a robot using Appium, but we don't have time for that. So, anyways, skip the math. Takeaways. Why did Appium succeed? Clear vision, put a lot of work into it, active community, inclusive. Anyway, so personal takeaway. I have this one quote I always end my presentation with. It's from Steve Jobs. I don't like Steve Jobs, but this is a good quote. Life can be much broader once you discover one simple fact. Everything around you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you. You can change it, you can influence it, and you can build your own things that other people can use. Once you learn that, you'll never be the same again. Hopefully, that was not too fast English for everybody here, because it's probably a second language for a lot of you. But anyways, the point of this quote is, I'm not that smart, and I made this thing, so you guys are probably smarter than me and can make things cool like this. So I would like to encourage you to go to any conference that'll have you, blog about it, tweet, make GitHub projects, share your ideas with people. They're probably crap. Half of my ideas are crap. No, 98% of my ideas are crap. But you probably have a good one in there like this, and the world doesn't have it right now because you haven't shared it with people. So that's what I would encourage you to do. Go and share your ideas with people at conferences, because people don't question stuff enough, and people just assume that some genius people have already figured this out, and often they haven't. So, like I said, I'm not a genius. I don't, send shit into space for a living. I worked at a dating site when I made this. So, share your ideas with people. You probably have cool stuff. You probably have probably an Appium sitting inside somebody right now, or something better than Appium. Maybe an Appium killer. So please, share it with people, blog about it, because open source needs people to contribute back to it. It shouldn't just be take, it should be give. And yeah, had I not shared this with people, I wouldn't be in Siberia right now, which I think is a good thing. So anyways, follow me on Twitter, more info. I have to go.